So I'm going to come to the table, and we've already learned about who these youth are, but I wanted to throw the first question out there. How do you understand climate change and its impacts? So I'm going to open the discussion now, and whoever's interested in first answering, it's going to be an informal dialogue, and I've been telling them that you all happen to be in the room while we chat around the dinner table. So how do you understand climate change and its impacts, whether it's you as an individual and Inuk youth in your communities, experiences that you've had, some of the things that you've shared with us over the last few days or just this morning? Who'd like to go first? Atami?
Nakomi. Mamea haluna yalanga kama suli. I think climate change is a whole larger discussion than climate change because it affects the entire Inuit way of life, the Inuit worldview. And I've heard from the elders in the last few days that the conversation naturally drifts towards our wildlife and the way it affects our wildlife and the environment that we and the wildlife live in. And that in turn affects our mental health, our well-being. It leads to suicide rates, and it leads to a food insecurity as well. So I think the conversation it goes further than just climate change itself. It impacts our whole Inuit way of life, and the fact that it's irreversible. Something needs to be done now, and it needs to be done fast, because even if we stop it now, we're still going to see the effects of it.
Is it Nuka?
Adam, I told when you said it affects our Inuit way of life in Cambridge Bay. Before I came to attend this conference, I did a few interviews with different Iqaluqtuutiaqmiut at home. And one key point that came up, and that was a modern trend in my interviews, was from one local elder. And he mentioned that we have to be ready and adaptable, like back in the olden day, to any drastic changes that are coming our way. So I agree with what you said when you mentioned it affects our Inuit way of life.
Why is our way of life important to you as Inuit youth, and how can we address it? How can we adapt? Or what are some of the experiences that you've had in your communities where climate change has affected? I know there was talk about change in weather. I'm gonna look at you, Coral, to share some of your experiences in Kuglokto in terms of hunting or the weather changes that you've identified, and share what the effects and impacts have on you as a youth. Mamiana.
Well, last time I went hiking, we had to almost go all the way to Yellowknife just to see caribou. And in the last 2 months, we had more storm days in the community than in the last 5 years.
So you're noticing that, Jordan?
Yeah. I'm only 15 years old, so I don't have much experience with any traditional knowledge. I'm not exactly the most traditional person. I'm half white and half Inuk, so I don't spend all my life in the north. But in the time I have lived here, which is like every spring and winter, the only time I go down south is for the summer. But this one thing really jumps out at me. It's and it's not exactly like big scale, like environment laws or anything like that, but as a youth representative, I think I should bring it up. So my house is like in the middle of town, and when I was younger, there was always this big, huge snowdrift. Like it was so big, it was like almost as tall as the houses. And every year we would dig holes in it and just like make little shelters or huts and just play in it and make even bigger tunnels. But it would always be broken up by the like big loaders and the things, so we always got so mad when they did it. But it was dangerous, like skidoos and trucks couldn't get by and everything. But now I even have a picture of me when I was like 7 or 6 that I was on top and I looked so happy, and it's just so, it was crazy, like snow getting that big. Like as a child, I didn't know that that was possible. But now I'm 15 years old. The highest the snowdrift gets is like to your knees. Like now nobody can really dig tunnels and enjoy it as much as I did when I was younger. So it's not exactly huge climate change, but to me it changed.
Adam?
And to add to what everybody is saying, climate change is going to continue to affect us as youth, because to practice who we are as Inuit is best done out on the land when we're observing our elders and our leaders, the way we survive out there, and by practicing it. But if climate change continues and our environment continues to change, it's going to be more and more difficult for that knowledge transfer from our elders to the youth to happen if we aren't able to get out as often. Because I've heard, and we've all noticed that our sea ice is forming later, or it doesn't last as long in the winter, or rivers are getting stronger. So it also shortens that season where we can get out there in the winter or summer, where we can learn from our elders.
Coral?
It's not only that too, it's also a matter of communication. I've noticed, like, I've went to multiple language courses, and it's been a lot easier to talk to elders than it has before. But I've also noticed that the other students and children in my community, they don't make the effort to try and communicate to their elders. And it's kind of sad to see that.
What do you think some of the barriers are for that knowledge transitioning and that communication, Coral? And anybody else who has input on that area?
None of the students, like in my community, we used to always visit elders. And now, like, we've lost so many in the past couple of years. I don't see many students helping our elders anymore. Like, whenever I see an elder on the road and nobody's helping them carry anything, like, they could just go to the store, and sometimes they can't speak English. Like, it takes them a while to think of it when they're at the checkout till. So when I see that, I usually tell the till worker, she's trying to get this, or he's trying to do this. Can you do this for them, please? It's like I'm translating. And then in the community, like, I've noticed that a few of our elders, they have their own quads and machines. And most of the time, their children and their grandchildren want to use the machine when actually the elders need it.
Can I just ask, you know how you said that some elders can't speak English to be able to communicate to youth? Would you also say the other side, some youth can't speak Inuktitut fluently enough to be able to communicate with elders?
Yeah.
We got mics when they're too close.
I saw Nuka nodding to that. Does anybody want to elaborate on that fact or the impacts of that? Teen Nuka?
Personally, I've, like when it comes to speaking with elders, that's my biggest barrier personally because I don't speak Inuktitut or Inuinnaqtun. I've been lucky enough though in the last 2 years studying at the Nunavut Arctic College, one of the key aspects of our education is meeting with elders in Iqaluktutiaq and having dialogue and conversation with them to learn about life in the day and transitioning into modern day. And I'm really happy that's been a part of our learning. I find it very important. But I would say that's one of the biggest barriers is the language. Yeah, not being able to converse back and forth in Inuinnaqtun.
Just as an aside, oh, Paka?
As an addition to the language barrier, we need a different kind of push to help our language barrier, because even myself, I have a hard time speaking Inuktitut, and all my family at home speaks Inuktitut. My mom speaks only Inuktitut to me, and even then, my father speaks more Inuktitut than I do, and as much as I try, it's still very hard. So I don't know if we have to find a different way for youth to learn Inuktitut, because it kind of hurts not talking to my mom in the same language.
And, oh, Jordan?
As bad as this is gonna sound, and I don't want to be like the downer, but I feel like not enough people, not enough youth care to try and learn the language or try and learn the more difficult things that you need to know to be completely traditional. Like, of course, many kids know how to like go out and catch a caribou and they know how to skin it in 5 seconds. But like, just because you can do that doesn't make you like super cultural. Like, it makes you pretty cool, but it doesn't make you really cultural. So, but that's what I think. I think not enough of the youth care enough to learn like the more challenging and more difficult things. So, and I'm not trying to sound mean, but that's my thought.
Juana, I think that what I've heard from youth is that they're interested and they feel, like some have said around the table, that there's a missing part without being able to have the fluency in our Inuit language, which impacts our relationships with knowledge keepers, our parents even, as well as elders who we value to spend time with. But I think the access to be able to do that has been limited in some cases. And I've also experienced that for some youth, if they've been teased or something once or twice or more than that, they say, "Kuyana, forget about it. There's no point for me to even try, because as much as I try, this happens." But I gather around the table that there is interest to be able to reclaim and redefine our relationship with our language, which would have an impact on our relationship with our culture and our relationship with you in this room. And I open the floor to other areas that climate change would impact. And a lot of times people, whenever I'm speaking in different forums, like the pictures I had shared, they're like, well, climate change is just science. Climate change is just the water. But it's different for Inuit, I find, and that's what I'm hearing around the table. What other areas are impacted by climate change for you? And on the topic of knowledge transfer, how is important is knowledge transfer in developing and maintaining our resiliency, and what are some ways that knowledge transfer can be developed? We've identified that some of the barriers are language and access, and sometimes there's no interest, as Jordan had said. It's true. But what are some other ways that we could be strengthening our resiliency? And Paka, if you'd like to start.
I think one of the biggest barriers to transferring knowledge from elders to the youth is it seems like it's a very one-way centered. Like it's just the elders it feels like it's just the elders who want to be doing the speaking and we have to be doing the listening. But it's a two-way street, and we both got to be able to listen to each other, because although we are in a different time than the elders are, we're in the same boat there, because we're 1 foot in one world and 1 foot in the other world. So it shouldn't be just transferring knowledge from elders to youth. It should be youth also engaging with the elders, and the elders should be engaging just as much as we are. Because I find that the only time elders and youth meet together is at places like this, unless you're family. So I think we all got to remember that even if we're all from different regions, different communities, and different last names, we're all still Inuit, and we should all still be trying to connect with our elders and our youth, even if there's not a family connection, because I feel that it's mostly family connections that link elders and youth.
So, not to put you on the spot, but what are some ways that we could have more of that relationship development? Inuit, I recognize that we're Inuit, we have to be united, but how are some ways that we can do that to strengthen our resiliency?
One of the main ways I see envisioning a two-way street between elders and youth is like, how do I say this? It's hard to say. It's like, I don't know how I want to explain how I think we should do it, but like it's on the tip of my tongue. I gotta.
Adam had something to say. Maybe
Yeah.
think about it and I'll bring it back to you.
All right.
Paka?
Yeah.
Okay. Adam?
I think before we talk about the ways that the knowledge transfer can be developed or redeveloped, is that we have to acknowledge that disruption in the knowledge transfer and the Inuit way of life is a direct result of colonization. And we need, and I've heard it this week from our elders, that there were some examples out there that when the schools came, a lot of Inuit let go of their children for that knowledge to be passed down through the schools, but it wasn't. It did the complete opposite. So I think there needs to be policies implemented from the federal to the territorial to the local levels to ensure that it's in our everyday lives and not at conferences like this, or 3 times a year, or 4 times a year, or a 1-week land trip in our school year. Why can't we as Inuit youth to choose to go through education out on the land all year long? Because that's how we develop these skills of the Inuit way of life, is through observation and practice. And then that's how we learn from it. So I think it's a very, very tough question to answer, but there needs to be policies and funding in place, continuous funding, and not just for conferences like this, but so that we can do it all year long, from things like harvester support programs to just funding this traditional way of education to happen all year long.
Before we continue this part of the conversation, I'm going to ask you, can you define decolonization or indigenizing a process, institution, or system, so that perhaps we as Inuit youth can identify ways that we can go in that direction in a way that makes sense to us, but also honors our elders?
By decolonizing, I again want to acknowledge that colonization still is very much alive today within federal policies, within our own minds. Through those assimilation policies, we were taught that, or it was instilled in us, that going to school, working from 9 to 5 is the right way to live. But that's not necessarily true. So I think decolonization means having our policymakers change the way they think and change the way policies are written, so that it acknowledges that things like Inuit Hauimayatuhangit is valuable, and that it should be ingrained in our policies, and that it takes a holistic approach. It's not just us and the elders, it's the people who control our money and our policies to understand that this is what's valuable to us. And in that, and reversing the way policies are written so that we don't have to keep talking about this, that we don't have to keep fighting for funding for what we want. That's all I have right now.
Snowballing off of what he said, does anybody have comments? Pakak, did you come around to the idea of how we can decolonize the process, but the Inuk way, and have that knowledge transfer? What are some other experiences around the room where it's been successful? Or what are some barriers that you've experienced other than language that we've already discussed that has been in the way of you as Inuit youth to be able to be Inuk the way that you want to? Because I always say that there's never a reason for us to have to compromise between tradition and modernity. We can marry both. So I know, Paka, you turned your mic on.
Building off of what Adam said, that we need to be able to secure funding and steady funding for being able to have things like this. A way I see envisioning a good transfer knowledge and decolonization would be, like Adam said, the traditional school year round. But rather than it only being like myself, I'm only 21, and I take my friends out hunting as much as I could because they don't have the means to hunt. They don't have skidoos or guns or boats, so I let them use my stuff and I go with them. And like my best friend Wayne, he caught his first ptarmigan, seal, and caribou with me, his first rabbit. And you know, in a way, I have certain knowledge that I'd like to pass on to my youth as well, to my friends. And so I think like a collaboration between youth who are lucky enough to like I find myself very lucky because I got to grow up hunting and I got to grow up fishing. Like I got to go and build cabins and learn how to make igloos. And I think that the best way to connect with youth is also through other youth. So like a collaboration between youth like myself and other youth who want to be helping shape the way we transfer knowledge, I think. And we don't have to all be pro at being on the land. It could be a learning session at the same time. That's kind of what I had thought.
Can I ask you a personal question? It gives me great happiness to see the confidence exuding from you when you're talking about your experiences hunting. How does that build the strength of you as a person and how you're making decisions? And if people had that same confidence across Nunavut, for example, or across Inuit Nunangat, other Inuit youth, how do you think things would be different? I know that's a huge question, but it just came to my mind.
I think if there's a confidence in all the other youth, like Jordan said, some youth don't even want to learn or they don't care to learn. If there is a confidence in the youth to want to come up with these things or to start these grassroots ideas, just doing it is what gave me the confidence. Like whenever I first started learning how to tie a hamutik, I would mess up. I'd tie a wrong knot or I'd tie it too loose, and I would get a bit discouraged. But you know, my dad wouldn't like say anything mean to me or talk down to me. He would just show me the proper way to tie it, and then I knew how to tie it, and that's what gave me confidence. Just learning in a safe environment and being able to feel safe with other youth and with elders is important. So.
And how does that affect your decisions each day? Does that even affect your decisions each day, do you think?
It does. Like,
how?
You gotta have confidence in things you want to do and problem solving. Like, when you're on the land, you don't have time, like, if you fell through the ice, you don't have time to stop and untie your hauntig. You gotta have something ready to pull yourself out with all the time. So I always keep something on the side of the sled to grab onto, or like just little things like that. Like, not, like if you wanted to put that into like today's context, you could say like carry an extra shoelace. What if your
Yeah.
shoelace rips, right?
Atami?
I just want to open up a conversation to the rest of the youth as well in terms of decolonization and indigenizing a process and whatnot. What does that actually look like? Indigenization of or indigenizing a process. For example, does it have to be in a room like this? Do we have to create policies in a room like this? Why can't it be out on the land? Why can't we take our federal policymakers and funders out on the land and discuss it out there? I feel like we're taught to think that it has to happen in a room like this. So just to open up the dialogue is how can we make decolonization or indigenizing a process happen?
Maybe I can ask our ETP students how they found their knowledge acquirement, like how they're gaining knowledge through their studies. That's different than the regular way of doing things. Does that make sense? Because I understand that you spend time out on the Nuna for stretches of time to be able to apply your skills that you learn in the classroom. But how does that affect you, or how do you find that way of doing things different than the mainstream way of doing things? If it's not ETP specific, I look to other Inuit youth to share their perspectives on the comment that Atami made. And if it's not school related, work related, Coral?
For me, I've noticed, like, I've been to multiple conferences like this, and we've talked about how we should be doing decolonization and what ways can we help Inuit pass on that knowledge and break down those barriers. And I've never ever seen somebody get to the next stage of actually doing it. There's so much talk about it, but yet you don't see much action for it.
Perhaps there isn't, a lack of a better term, a stage or a process that allows this to happen as an everyday thing. You're saying that it kind of ends at these gatherings, which are very great. You know, there might be a report written that people can read and review, or videos from the conference, but you're saying that it's not happening every single day. It's not happening at the community level. It's not happening at the regional level or federal, like nationally.
Yeah.
So how come? And what does you as Inuit youth who are, you know, have to live with decisions that are being made that affect us every day, what does that mean to you? What happens in your head about that? Or do you want to see institutions or processes that reflect actual change? Why does it matter anyway? I really think it matters. I'm just asking like that. Trust me. Ati?
I think that when you go conferences like this, and then you discuss everything, and then you don't, like, you have this plan in these conferences, you follow the agenda, and you talk about what ways we could do this, and then you don't actually, like, let the communities talk about how they're going to bring it into their community.
Do you think there has to be more capacity, more empowerment at the community level for for these type of bigger discussions to be practiced on a regular basis in communities?
Yeah.
Who will lead that?
I think the people that go to these conferences should be the leaders on how they're going to be able to bring it back to their community and Inuit decolonization on an everyday basis.
Very good, I agree. Does anyone else comments on that particular topic or that thread? Atami?
With regards to what Coral said about coming to these conferences and not much comes out of it, or it's very slow, and I think that's what I meant by decolonization and indigenization. That this decolonization needs to happen at every level. And I've spoken on a panel before, and some of these people are in the room, is that if we don't begin to decolonize, we're going to keep talking about it, and we're going to have to fight tooth and nail for funding and policies to be created in our favor in order for us to live our way of life.
Jordan?
Now, by decolonization, do you mean like kicking everyone out except for Inuit? And like we just learn how to speak Inuktitut and we just learn how to hunt caribou and hunt muskox, and is that what you mean by decolonization?
Alka, if I can, I think that decolonization is exactly what the generation before us started in terms of negotiating land claims agreements so that Inuit, as the majority living in our regions, can continue to live our way of life, but within the structure that we are currently in. And that meant that continuing our ways within the home, family dynamics, continuing to be able to speak Inuktitut, not in a forceful way, but as a way where it, frames our identities, to continue to be able to live on and in Inuit Nunangat, and be able to thrive off what Inuit Nunangat has to offer. And so instead of it being top down always, whereby somebody who is not Indigenous, someone who is not Inuit, and in conversations like this where we're being told how to live, it's the reversal of that. We can continue to decide how we are going to live. That's the decolonization process. And it's not beefy. It's like, yo, what the heck? It's nothing like that at all. Inuit have always been, tunganatu, welcoming and inclusive. Nunavut is a great example of it being a public government, despite the fact that we have an Inuit-specific land claim. We live harmoniously with non-Inuit, and it's continuing on that path. Inuyugut, that's just how we are.
But we can go out and we can live on the land. But I'm sure if you ask every single person in this room that's not at this table how it was to like live in a tent or live in an igloo for like the first, I'd say, 7 or 10 years of their lives, some of them longer, they would probably say it's a lot easier to live in a house rather than living in a tent or an igloo.
May be the case, but that's the process. Is like we as individuals have the opportunity to decide how we want to live. But I take your point, and I know Atami has a response.
Yeah, to answer your question about decolonization, through my studies at Nunavut Sivuniksavut, I've learned that you could separate into 4 different areas we were colonized, and that was physically, so the Europeans and outsiders coming in, intellectually, politically, and economically. And what I mean by decolonization is decolonizing the way we think, because we were assimilated and put into schools and forced to think certain ways, and forced to think the Inuit way of life was a savage way of life, and that we have to adapt to the modern world. Sure, we can adapt to certain areas, but again, I think a lot of us are intellectually colonized, and that's what I mean by decolonization is that first it starts with us, that There's certain ways we were forced to think from decades ago, but also decolonizing the policies that were created over the decades to assimilate us. Some of those are still alive, and I'm sorry I don't have any examples right now, but there are some barriers in place within policies that essentially try to keep us moving forward in a Western way.
I didn't mean to do that. So I open it up to, I know that Clara wanted to make a comment, and we'll continue the conversation about, so I think there was interest to talk about why it matters to individuals or Inuit youth that we continue on this process as individuals. Kalona titu or Inuk titu na matto.
Well, in Clyde River, most of the majority, well, in fact, all of the community speaks Inuktitut, and we are encouraging Inuktitut, and we will continue to encourage.
And that really touched me because as an Inuk, I know every other Inuk cares about their Inuit culture or something. And I think that, well,
well, in Clyde River, our elders are quickly.
Those that are knowledgeable are dying off. Us youth growing up, have to help each other and support each other to keep those traditions alive through helping each other, try and keep them alive on a daily basis, and that our use of English in Kanyaktugapik, there isn't that much English speaking, but I'm very proud of that fact that we always speak Inuktitut in our community first. I would like to be able to give you this magic package to pass it on to others.
Me?
Thank you.
That line before I shift and kind of review that area. Anything? Grease Fjord, Ituangat, Jenny, Nuka, Coral. Maybe. So this is my question then. You know, we're talking a lot about policies, we're talking about process. We understand that this gathering in particular is not just a conference, but sort of like a consultation with regards to a policy or a strategy that is going to be developed that affects us on a daily basis. I know some of you had the opportunity to watch a movie yesterday called Angry Inuk about the sealing industry, and there were really good examples there that were showing the impact of decisions that were made that impacted Inuit overnight, which meant that economies were impacted, access to culture were impacted, ways in which people were spending each day being able to eat inusiut, and as well as continue to work with skins because of a decision that was made by people who didn't understand us, that impacted us every day. There's a huge risk to that. Poverty went up because of that. Access to culture was affected by that. So are you suggesting then that engagement in the process of policy development, just working off of what Atami was saying and knowing that this is part of why we're here, is important? Should we be a part of that discussion at the initial stages? Should it be something that we're always a part of Do we agree on when policies are being developed that, okay, that's the policy, namatu, or are we part of that implementation process as well? Like, how do you think that we should be engaged on the decision-making process? Not necessarily prescribing right now how that's done, but I just want to get some feedback about that area. I know Nuka wanted to give a comment, and then Paka.
In the process of policy implementation, I think it's really important for Nunavut youth, elders, adults to be engaged from the initial stages right up into implementation, keeping all of Nunavut informed, all communities. Having conferences like this is wonderful because it brings the territory together, and like we're such a small population, but we're so geographically separated. So when I learned that I was invited to this conference, I was really excited because it's networking with fellow Nunavut and seeing what everyone has to say. So I think it's really important that everyone is engaged initially, and when we return back to our communities, and having other fellow community members work along with the processes.
I think regarding decolonization, it's very important to remember that we've only had one or two generations of decolonization. Like a lot of the elders in here, they can remember a time when they lived on the land, and specifically on the land, and followed our traditions. And if you look at the other Indigenous people in Canada, they've had up to 7 generations of colonization. They've had many more years than we have had dealing with the government, and that means the government has had many more years than we had dealing with Indigenous people. So when you're gonna think of decolonization, you got to think that we're trying to it's like thinking of the youth trying to speak to the elders. It's like us Inuit trying to speak to the federal government. The federal government has had so many more years of experience in this area than we have had. And when we want to move forward, it's this kind of engagement is what we need. We need more of it, like Adam said. We need more than just some consultation conference like this, because it's a living process that we're moving through, and we gotta keep in mind that we're very young when it comes to this. So having a grassroots operation like this, we're realizing we need more than just a conference. It's like perfect that we're realizing that, because it's true.
So what are some of the ways that we could be doing this as individuals in our communities across our region?
Yeah.
Hi?
Can I add to that fast?
Sure.
Just to make it quicker.
Okay, our territory and our country to combat the effects of climate change, but ensure that we're reflected in the policies that will implicate our day-to-day lives. Paka, and then I open the floor to other members as well.
To combat this kind of thing, we got to remember that we're not the only Indigenous people in the country. There's Dene, Cree, Ojibwe, Anishinaabe. There's natives all over the country that have been fighting the same fight that we're fighting. And you hear Trudeau talking about wanting a nation-to-nation relationship with the Indigenous people, but how can we have a nation-to-nation relationship when we, the Indigenous people, aren't united? Like, we're separated into factions. We have the Inuit, we have the natives, we have the Métis, we have ITK, the AFN. But why don't we have one specific group to help talk to the government about this? Like Adam said, that today we still see the colonization in the minds of the government and everything, and it's true. Back when we started being colonized, the government saw us, like they dealt with us differently a bit than they did with the natives. And it's like this right now. They're dealing with just us right now, then they're gonna probably go deal with just only the natives. They should deal with us all at the same time, and we should get together with the other natives in Canada, the other Indigenous people, if we want to move forward. We got to move together as one. Like Ataw Siri Khatta.
Atami, and then passing it around the table.
I just maybe want to explain a little bit why I keep turning back to policies and funding. A lot of the money in Nunavut comes from the federal level, and through those policies and how we are funded. And in today's society, and in the way we were colonized, money is our economy. It's not trading food. It's not necessarily tools and things like that. But it's money, and we need money to do anything nowadays. But oftentimes, decolonization and indigenizing the process also that's part of funding as well, because oftentimes that funding comes with a red tape or a barrier from those policies that don't allow us to sometimes do exactly what we want with the money. And further to that, it often comes late. We get it sometimes 26 weeks out of a 52-week year. It comes late, and we're given a time frame in which we have to spend it. That affects the way we're going to use it and what we're going to do with it. And on top of that, the travel is never taken into consideration. There's often barriers in travel itself. It's not taken into consideration that it's one of our essential services, and that sometimes the weather plays a part in our flights being canceled. That's not taken into consideration either. So that's what I kind of mean by policies and funding, is that even though it's said to be for us and led by us, there's often the red tape, the barriers in the way, and then other things like travel is not taken into consideration.
In Chukisiyunga, I totally understand what you're saying, and I can say from experience that through the work that I've done in my volunteer role, we've experienced that as well, where there's been 1% of Canadians outside of Inuit Nunavut who have visited Inuit Nunavut, and it's outside of Inuit Nunavut where decisions are made. And so it's very difficult, and it's very easy to know why we have these barriers, because decisions are being made by people who don't necessarily understand our realities. The multi-year funding requirement is something that I think everybody in this room has felt, or people from the same communities and organizations that you work for, by virtue of the fact that it's not sustainable having short-term funding. There needs to be resources in place, like people who are writing these proposals and also reporting on the proposal outcomes when 32 weeks in a 52 calendar year means that you have a month to do a program in your community. How is that sustainable? Inuit engagement, I'm hearing, is not at the forefront, and Inuit, a part of the policy development might be a way in which that these barriers are no longer occurring. And we all know here that travel has affected even our congregation over the last few days, and I'm so happy that we have some of the people at this table despite missing the first few days. That's life. Sila rules all. But to me, another barrier is that when policies are being made that are national in scope and being applied here, where our cost of living, where we don't have roads connecting us, and that all implicates everyday business. And another question that I was going to be asking is, what are the sustainable economies or industries of tomorrow that will be helpful in how we're adapting and addressing climate change, and even use of internet, bandwidth, telecommunications, despite that being a fiduciary responsibility, the way that it's seen in other jurisdictions is not how we see it, so that limits us as well. And these are all very basic things that should be at arm's reach but aren't necessarily. But just going back then to, we have to wrap up. I want to ask, is there anything else that you'd like to add or reflections on our conversation? What I'm going to do is pass the mic around for one last round for starting this way over. If you'd like to speak, please do. If you don't, just pass it on. Reflections of our conversation, things that you wanted to say that you didn't have a chance to. If I was moving too fast between questions, something that you wanted to add, Ati, please share. Your input is very valuable, and everybody would like to hear it, and we'd also like to have it on the record. So I'll start with you, Clara.
I don't. I have nothing to say. I'll pass it on. Oh.
Back to way back in the early discussion, I think it was Pakak, you mentioned that you grew up hunting and that you felt very lucky to grow up hunting. I feel the very same way. I grew up going out with my dad, and it really, being connected to your culture brings a real sense of belonging, and it's really nice to have, whether that be sewing, beading, there's different ways to practice the Inuit way of life, and I was lucky enough to grow up going out on the land with my dad, and I'll always hold that very close. And going back to that, and everything is interconnected through the Inuit way of life and climate change and how that affects the way of life. So, yeah.
I'm gonna add to what Nuka said. I was lucky to go out on the land with my dad, and I've over the years I've also done a lot of sewing and stuff. But the teenagers, like the boys in my community, they think whenever a girl goes hunting that they're not gonna get anything. They're too bad at it. They can't do it. And there's one boy in my class that, like, my teacher asked us, who all goes hunting? Who's caught a caribou before? And I raised my hand, and a boy in my class whispered to another boy and said, where does she go hunting? I didn't know she knows how to go out. And then I stood up for myself and said, girls don't have to do what boys say. If we want to do something that the boys think that we can't do, you're actually pushing us to do it more, because you're actually, like, how do I say it? You're persuading us to show you that we could do it, and to show you, like, see, we could do it. We proved you wrong. And like, he always tries to do this, like, to us girls in the class. And like, for CTS courses, when the boys in our class found out that we were going out on the land to go and fix a cabin, they got really mad and said, hey, that's for us, because only girls signed up and the sign-up sheet was full. And then with the Inuit Naktun in my community, it ends at grade 9. We've been trying to change that for a long time, but from grade 10 to 12, we don't have Inuit Naktun courses. It's not in our curriculum. And that's another thing I want to change. Thank you.
Well, everyone else has been talking about hunting and stuff. As a child, I was born with a heart defect, so my mother was always scared. I'm a mama's boy, so I'll say it with pride. My mom was always scared that I'd get like too excited and like I wasn't allowed to do anything like scary or fun. Like, that was all my brother. So I just recently caught my first caribou and muskox last year. So, so I was very proud of that. But being born like with that heart disorder, heart defect, I guess, really affected my way of like of being like truly cultural and like having the ability to go out and hunt. And I hear stories of my friends and like they just go out when they're 3 years old. And they catch their first caribou. But it's really saddening that I wasn't able to experience that when I was younger. So I'm just thankful that I'm all better now and I can do it all now. Thanks.
I just wanted to add before we're done that I'm very, very thankful for all the elders who are sharing their stories over the last few days, because it's very important to realize that once this day and age is done, we're gonna one day we the youth are gonna be the elders, and knowing the knowledge that you guys have passed towards us, even in these last few days, about 13 seasons or 13 months, the different seasons and the differences between regions, even if we have the same seasons. Like little knowledge like that, I would have never known little things like where people in Nayat might be egg picking earlier than we are here or something like that. Like these little tidbits of knowledge that we learned from you, the elders, in the last few days. I'm very thankful to hear that, because one day I want to be teaching the same way you guys are, and it's a very big aspiration of mine.
And I just want to reiterate the thank you to the elders. Again, I've learned a lot, and we've all learned a lot. And also reiterating that climate change is interconnected with everything else, that if it's affecting our way of life, then it's affecting our mental well-being, and it's affecting food security. And even further to that, reiterating that the knowledge transfer piece is important to me, because we need to continue this knowledge transfer in a holistic approach so that it's passed down to all of our Inuit youth, and not just the ones who choose to be, that it's year-round and not just at conferences like this. And I think that's it.
Khiyanami.
Thank you.
And I want to bring it back to the last photo. I wonder if I can do this. I want to thank, I wonder, can you try just to the last photo? I'd like to thank each one of you for participating in this very important dialogue. And I think that it's clear that the dialogue must continue amongst youth. Just a note, that last picture. Just a note on language. We aren't all where we'd like to be when it comes to language, but continue on with your relationship with your language. And one thing that I was taught was 1 word a day means that you get 365 new words in your vocabulary in the year. But the more that you're practicing, the quicker that process happens, and you string those words together, and soon enough you'll be able to, in your own time, be able to speak Inuktitut. It's clear that there is a desire and interest to continue to have more access to our culture, our practices, and our knowledge. And so encouraging you, when you go back to your communities, to spend more time with our knowledge keepers. And I know that knowledge keepers are waiting for us to go and talk to them and learn from them. But it's not only, that's a very minute example on an individual basis. I hear that there's interest in having more access through the current structures that exist, or creating a different way in which that knowledge transfer can continue. Because the Inuit way of life is being climate change agents. It's the definition of being a climate change agent, because it is taught to us that we must respect and care for our environment and our wildlife, because without it, we wouldn't be here. And so let us continue in that direction. I'm hearing interest to foster stronger communities within our families, within our own communities, with our different structures of government, as well as our different nations around the world, but in the interest of ultimately strengthening our resilience. And I just wanted to point out, there are some reasons why guys might tease girls, Cora, and we don't have to say exactly why, but it's an example of how we are adapting. Times have changed. Over the last few days, participants of the conference have been discussing roles and responsibilities that occurred in the family, in the kammak, in the camp, and so on. We're in a different time, but times have changed, and we've always had to adapt to certain scenarios. My grandmother, Annie, was the oldest, and she had to go hunting with my grandfather because she was the oldest, and that was what was required at that time. And so that's an example of when Inuit women would participate in different roles and responsibilities, but it's encouraged that we continue to participate in cultural practices. And that's my excuse and reason why I'm very proud to enjoy hunting and practicing things as well. So in conclusion, I wanted to say Khoyanamik to each one of you, Khwana Nakumik, and thank you to everyone who's listened. I know there isn't actually time for a question and answer period between other conference attendees and the youth, but come to the youth after. Pakak is enthusiastically inviting you to have a dialogue with him, and I look forward to seeing actual actions, like we've said, have been absent as of late in some situations. So, thank you very much. Lena?
Let us all stand. All right. Awesome. Thanks to all of you participants from the youth group.
I'm
not sure if we should open for questions, maybe a couple of questions.
Yes, we're going to have coffee soon. Let's get to those ones. I have a few questions. This is not a question. I just wanted to mention. We weren't raised exactly in the traditional way. We used to be young at one point also. Our parents, those were our roots. Our parents were our ancestral roots, and we obeyed them. They were our leaders. That was the way we lived. And when we were obedient, our parents appreciated this. If we had no roots, no ties to our history through our parents, even our grandparents, our parents, we would have be filled with many troubling times if we disobeyed. But because we try, I only want to mention how proud I am. I'm so proud of you and really appreciate you're already right in there. You're already way up there. Us, on the other hand, with facing the issues on hand, we had a more difficult time trying to acclaim what little was given to us. It was a weak effort. It appeared to be a weak effort. But this, since my raising, my history, since I was young, It's not a very lengthy period of time. It's just a short period of time from our parents to our grandparents' time. When they are proud of us, they show their pride in us. Then we have arrived. All our ancestors, the parents, us, we are uplifted while we are being praised. But now, today, our youth, nice young people, they are going to be adults one day. They are collecting memories that they will keep with them in the future. How do we? What can we do? How do we become self-actualizing? How do we live off the land? How can we move ahead? We weren't exactly like that deep thinking. We lived off the land, off the animals. Those were the things that our parents could praise us for. That really uplifted an individual person's life, the life sustenance, the life essence makes you as a whole human being. I want to keep this short, but I want to show my appreciation and pride in these young people. Thank you for this moment. Thank you. Very strong words, very powerful words from you all. This is neither a question. I want to just mention that I'm so proud of these youth, that they're able to voice and very comprehensive, that
To express yourself.
I understand.
feeling. I emphasized with how you feel. I went to school also.
I was in school myself, and it has touched our lives. And it brought me back to that time. A young girl in the corner, I don't remember her name, that we can be huntresses. Don't let any challenge stop you from continuing. This is part of our culture and way of life. And you said you were 15. You were making me cry listening to you. It is not too late. You can try at any time to start promoting our culture and language. Each one of us has a different challenge that could possibly put a stop to our progression, but learning from others. We got interfered with the school system. Only when we got out of the school system did we start learning our own culture and language again. So it is never too late to relearn your language and culture, especially those of us that were from the generation of the residential schools that really distracted our growth as Inuit. And when we came back, it seemed like we were treated as strangers. It was a great challenge that we had. Aside from the generation gap, we also had the cultural gap within our own people and parents. And so I understood from the 15-year-old comments, you can no longer be afraid of the government and even someone older than you. I also heard by listening that we have to strengthen our culture. We are going to continue to live in Nunavut. We will never become Caucasian. I know that. That's what I heard, and I was so proud to hear that. So proud. Keep trying. Don't give up.
Ikaw mangimay.
August, when you guys are speaking English, you guys gotta take turns.
Oh, so he's on? I'm on over.
I'd also like to express my pride, but I have tears of joy and pride listening to you. That's what I live to hear from our young people, how you feel. And when we do have these challenges, people daring us and so on, it's the knowledge that's being, I know we had the same feeling with some of our elders. When I was younger, they would tell me that this could be, I'm old enough to be her mother, or we were from the same generation I was, and it's the same thing as sewing. Even the way I sew is the same as hers. So my namesake was something that made me proud, having similar skills as the one that I was named after. The starting is always the hardest part. We do have different talents that we can show, but listening to your discussions, I saw in each of your hearts that you are Inuit. In your hearts, you are an Inuk that no one can destroy. There is no way our hearts can become non-Inuit. It's in there. Just don't give up. I am so happy to hear what I heard, and I'm so proud. I want your future to be the very best, and you will pass through the path of life, and you are following, you are going in the right direction. We keep hearing that the climate is changing, the lives are changing, and I'm so envious of your enthusiasm and your future that is all in front of you. But I know some of the elders who are here may not be around to see you become elders, but I'd like to say how proud. I like to express it in the proper way, but because of the time factor, I show tears very easily. But listening to you, I have tears of pride. And the first opening lines, and especially the throat singers, I started crying right from there, and just to hear, to hear how good they are. We did practice that as young people, and we called it something else, and we call it ammakto. Before we started using the term throat song, I was so proud of those performers. It seemed like I was in another place, and it seemed like I was transformed to another location. Maybe something the hunters could have used when they're sneaking upon the basking seal. Thank you. Thank you, Lino. Just a short comment. I don't have much of a question either. I know there's so many of us in the conference here, and we really didn't experience what you're experiencing. We were much more culturally entrenched. We keep saying the world is turning. We have to keep turning with it. As long as we keep up with the turn, with what is happening, it's not just us, it's the things around us. There's so many development taking place, And there are some people in this globe that are meeting challenges. I know we are being influenced by the Americans, and they are going through some hard times. But when I was younger, I think yesterday was referred to we were able to sell the seal skins and so on. And I do remember, and because I was working and I was making $100, and people were laughing at me because I didn't have a job, because I turned with the world and
follow the world. That's the only success. There's a lot happening in the world right now. The world is turning. We have to turn as well. That's where we are discussing the global warming. It's changing, and we have to change our way of life. But we have to look for ways to succeed. What we're going to use for building in the future. Look at the shoreline. It's rolling. The global warming happening is more rapidly here in the north, in Canada, perhaps throughout the world. I was in Macares with Matali. I met a guy from Marshall Islands. Jokingly, he said to me, "You give me water, but I give you heat." Because Marshall Islands, low islands, sinking. And we experience warmer weathers. That's why we are trading, but both of us have to work together in order to achieve how we're going to tackle our lives in the future. You know, past life is good, but it's gone. Let's look forward and look for ways to how we're going to achieve as a generation or as an Inuit in a changing world. Economic.
final comment. Yes, expressing my pride, extreme pride as well, and I'm anticipating for this month. We're from all parts of Nunavut, Kuwait, and Qikqtaruk, and Baffin. The culture of the Inuit is exactly the same wherever you go. We have slightly different dialects and languages and terms as you go from place to place in Nunavut. It is because we were not sharing as much as we should have, and I do apologize for that. We could still pass a lot more knowledge in the future. On that note, I'd like to say, as long as the species and animals are here and healthy, we will live off them. The young people look forward to your future and continue on that path and keep that cooperation in mind to work alongside us wherever you come from, Kitamute, Kuwait. That if we're going to keep separated and not cooperate with each other, it will become a challenge within the country of Canada. We don't represent as a population, a large population percentage of the country, but because we have so many young people, we have a young age for the territory. It doesn't matter who you are. Each one of us is very valuable. Maybe piece of advice to you, whatever you hear, make sure it's based on facts. And if you're going to be distracted on fiction or something that's not true, then you will be distracted from your path. It will have consequences such as friction, and so stick to the facts. our lives do say that if one hunter has become too successful, the rest of the camp got envious and started to pick on that person. I grew up around Igloolik. I moved to Pond Inlet. My parents moved there. Thank you for entertaining us with your thoughts. Keep going and do not give up. And we will help you as much as we can. Thank you.